Nscaler454 here. Welcome back to the channel. Coming right off our last video where we laid our pavement, we're now going to do some extra details on it. We're going to throw some buildings up, and we're also going to ballast our track. So we have a lot to do, so let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is draw on our white stop lines at our train crossing. I've already taped them off, and this width is 0.1 of an inch, which is, in real life, would be about 16 inches. And in my area, a stop line is supposed to be anywhere between 12 and 24 inches, so we're right in the middle. Now, I tried different, ideas on what I can use to mark this in. I used this white pencil crayon kind of thing here that I had laying around. Didn't work. I used this permanent marker paint, which did work very well, except that it's very thin, so it can pool, and it can also bleed in the edges. So I'm going to use this Tamiya X2 white paint, and I'm going to dry brush on the first layer just to try to prevent bleeding. Okay. That might be a little bit more than just a dry brushing, but still, very thin coat. I'll do a second coat, and then we'll pull the tape off, and hopefully no bleeding. All right, let's pull this off. Now, I totally expect some paint to come off of the road, but hopefully it's not too bad. That's all right. Ooh, still a little bit of bleeding, though. Still a little bit. A little bit of a mark there. But overall, it's not the worst. Next, I'm going to add some drops of this black Vallejo wash to simulate oil going down when the trucks are parked at or stopped at the stop point for the crossing. So let's do a couple of dabs here and there. I'm not going to be too crazy with it. As you can see, I'm using a very fine tip brush. Now this is a wash, not just black paint, so it should absorb. If you want it a little watered down, just add a little bit of water. Especially when it's going over the crossing part. If it's looking a little too much, just take some water and spread it around. So we have our oil stains at the crossing completed. You can see it's just a little more concentrated behind the line where the trucks would be stopped. Also, I put some stain marks in where the train goes because obviously the locomotives are going to have some leaks and things like that as well. I just think that gives it a little bit more depth. I have these buildings put down temporarily because we are now going to airbrush on some tire marks and just general blending. I'm going to be using Model Air NATO Black, which I'm going to thin by about 50% water, 50% paint, because I'd rather build up some layers than going on too thick. And like I said, we're going to do the rubber marks, which technically there should be 4 lanes, or 4 marks, 1, 2, 3, 4. But because there's no yellow divider line, the trucks are going to do a lot of overlap. So I'm going to do 2 generic black lanes, I guess you could say. I think that'll look all right. And then I have to blend it with the structures, as it crosses over and in here, for example. So that's why those are in place. Now I've also put in some cracks, and the tools I used, the pen like usual, but I find that if I use this sharp, modeler knife, I can get some really fine cracks in there. You can see the difference, and I think this looks better. And then to make it stand out, I highlight it or go over it with a dark, weathering powder. This is dark steel, which black would be better, but that's what I have. Anyways, you can see that starts to stand out, and like I said, to me that looks a lot better, especially in N scale where things are so much smaller. So just a little tip for you guys if you're doing some cracks. And now let's throw on the airbrush and see how this turns out. With the lanes painted, even though it's not overly aggressive, it's definitely noticeable, and it definitely gives a feeling of, I guess, flow of traffic. And there is a bit of a strategy to this. So I have it in my mind that most of the traffic comes from the refinery and then comes through here, gets loaded up and exported out. So there's more traffic leaving than there is coming through. And things like the Petco facility, which is like coal, it's a very dirty facility, so this lane right here is quite dark comparatively to the other lanes. That's on purpose. And then over here, there is some crossover that goes over to make it, obviously we got to change lanes. And then here we have a lane that goes into this loading, and then you can see some traffic that goes and S's around that. So, like I said, there is a bit of a strategy to it, and I don't know, I think it looks okay. What do you guys think? Always leave a comment. I do appreciate it. For now, I can move on to pulling up the plastic and the tape, and then we can get to detailing the track. When it comes to detailing the track, even though I've already painted it on the rail ties as well as the rails, to break up that monotonous single color, I like to use a variety of different colors on random rail ties just to break things up. I use red, brown, buff, and sky gray, all from Tamiya. And when it comes to the older tracks like these ones, the sidings, I'm going to use more of the lighter colors than I will the darker ones, because the elements, the sun and stuff has hit these for many, many years, and they're just going to be a little more worn down than your main line. Now I use a dry brush technique where I just take some paint, kind of wipe it off on a rag, and then that little bit of excess that's on your brush, you just brush it onto your track, and it just brings out the highlights or darkens things up, and it just gives it some variation. When it comes to ballasting, there are many, many different materials you can use and several different ways you can apply it. I like to use Arizona Rock and Minerals Northern Pacific Gray, part number 1301, mixed 50-50 with my own ballast that I filtered, out of some sand/gravel. I like to apply it using one of these little N-scale ballast applicators. For me, they work really well. They get me about 80% of the way. And then to finally put them into place, I have a soft bristle brush and a hard bristle brush. And then once that's all in place, I then glue it with like a 3-to-1 mixture of glue to water. I didn't really think about it, but this section is done with the track laying flat on the cork, so there's really no shoulder for it. But I will work around it. I think we'll be okay. I think we'll be okay. For the Petco facility, I want the ballast to fit right up against this base structure here and be flush and level. So I placed some strips of that foam tape, which should allow me to ballast right against it to be nice and level and also be a nice square line. So when I pull up the tape, the building should go back down almost perfectly. So we have our ballasting done, and I think it looks fantastic. It's not completely dry because it is real rock and sand, so it holds onto the moisture like crazy. Now you can see once it is dry, it'll look closer to that than this, so it's going to go through a little bit of changes, which is fine. Over here, I wanted to show you all that little paint detailing we did on the track. Look how that looks. Man, does it give it some character on, especially on these siding tracks that have some age to them. But even on the main line, you can see the different colors in there, and it just makes it look so much better. The next thing to do is weather our turnouts, and really the whole track in general, but there's always an accumulation of grease and grime around your switches, and that's always quite a black look to it. So I'm going to use a combination of engine black flat, grimy black flat, and the Vallejo wash, and maybe even the airbrush, and just to give it some darkness in certain areas. I did go over this area with an airbrush and a very thin coat of black paint because this is a slow-moving traffic area. The locomotives are going to be stationary while doing the switching, so there's going to be a lot more oil spills and just, you know, general wear and tear. So I feel like I wanted it a little bit darker than the normal ballast kind of color up here. I don't know how dark that's going to be because, well, the ballast isn't dry yet. So once this is dry, I'll see just how dark it actually is. I may have to go over it again. Over here where the Petco is, I did darken this up significantly more. Again, because all the soot and stuff from the materials are going to settle down right in this area. As when we put our building in, like that, it will, like I said, all that, you know, gungy, dirty kind of soot that gets floating in the air is going to settle down there. Funny enough, you can hardly tell the difference once the building's in place. That's interesting. So again, may need to darken that up later. We'll see. Threw a couple buildings in just for the sake of it, just to kind of give you guys an idea what it's going to be. But I'm not going to put them all in because all that's got to come back up because we got to do our ground cover next, which is going to be our next video. So make sure you subscribe. And if you like this video, hit the thumbs up. And as always, thanks for watching.